In the autumn season of 2020, the third webtoon anime Noblesse was released. With it receiving a lethargic receptions, it seemingly lacked the flair that God of High School had, or the intriguing world that Tower of God had. However, one thing that helped deflate the viewer's reception of the anime was the feeling that you were missing something when you watched the first episode. And that was not the viewer's fault for once. It turns out there had been a 30-minute OVA released in 2016, which is where you were meant to start watching Noblesse from, thus making the Crunchyroll original series the second season of the anime. This has caused confusion for anime-only watchers, and led to some people simply dropping the show due to how they were unaware about the OVA. For me, following on from the OVA was the wrong decision, and they should have started the new anime series from scratch. As, if you started to watch the anime with no prior knowledge about the webtoon, you instantly feel confused as the anime references things which have occurred prior to the show and there is no context given. You start to ask questions such as, why did they need to use a mind erase spell, and who are Razzle and Frankenstein? It immediately gives off the feeling of the anime being incredibly convoluted and confusing from the get-go, which instantly turns certain people off from watching it. As a non-webtoon reader would naturally assume that either A, it is confusing because of the poor adaptation, or B, it is confusing because this is how the webtoon starts and there are a lot of flashbacks later on to explain it, which admittedly it does do. Either way, without the knowledge that the OVA exists, the first-time anime viewer would leave the first episode of the anime feeling confused about the convoluted story, or believing it to be a bad adaptation that is simply not worth their time, thus making the show lose viewers that have not lost if they had simply started the anime from the beginning of the webtoon, rather than as a direct follow-on to the OVA. To follow on from this, the OVA is not even listed on the same Crunchyroll webpage as the Noblesse anime is. So initially, for most people, it does not even appear that there isn't even OVA to begin with. This separation of the OVA is not something that Crunchyroll usually does though, and is especially strange since both the OVA and the anime are made by the same production studio. Other shows with predating OVAs, such as Ancient Magus Bride, have had their OVAs included in the same webpage as the anime series that proceeded from it. So the viewer can effortlessly see there was initially an OVA along with the anime series that followed on from it, rather than in Noblesse's case, where the OVA is on a completely different webpage that you have to manually search up to find. Furthermore, to even search it up to begin with, you need to know that it exists to start with, and for many anime watchers who are not an active part of the anime discussion community, you would not even know that it exists. This lack of signage to the OVA is a key reason for why the decision to start the anime from the point after the OVA was a terrible idea, as without the proper signage to the OVA, people would not know about its existence to begin with, and instead just find the anime weirdly structured. The decision to start from after the OVA is also a bad decision from a marketing standpoint. People are not going to want to read a webtoon of an anime adaptation that comes off as incredibly botched. Most people like to read ahead if the anime is good, as they want to see what happens in the next episode before it airs, or they read on after the anime is finished to see what happens next before the new season. Both require people to become invested in the anime beforehand. Noblesse's decision to start from the OVA does not give that, as lots of people who did not know about the OVA would need to read the webtoon to understand the show. And there are not many people who would want to read a manga or webtoon to find out how the anime is meant to go, rather than because they're excited about the anime and want to know what happens next. So what usually happens is that people see the first episode and decide to simply drop the anime, rather than to bother to either read the webtoon, or are lucky enough to find out about the OVA they were meant to watch first. A counterpoint to these arguments is that the OVA had already animated the start of the anime, so why bother animating something that has already been animated? Especially if the fanbase behind Noblesse had already seen the OVA prior to the anime. For them it would feel like a pointless repeat. I strongly disagree with this argument however, as to start off with the OVA is over 4 years old, so most fans who saw it at the time would need a refresher. To compound this, the OVA features the canonical character Yuna, who has been erased in the recent anime adaptation of it for some reason. So for people watching the OVA as an intro episode, would then spend the first episode of the anime adaptation wondering what happened to her, and why she is not in the new series. This is the most glaring inconsistency between the anime and the OVA, apart from the slight differences in animation style that occur over time with the changing of production staff and the production quality. Overall, the decision to have the Noblesse anime follow on from the OVA was a poor one. Most anime-only watchers get initially confused by why characters are acting a certain way, and who they are since they appear without any proper introduction. To compound this, the lack of signposting towards the OVA by Crunchyroll means that the viewers outside the anime discussion bubble would take the series at face value and see it as a convoluted mess, reducing their interest in it. Although starting from the beginning of the webtoon would be reanimating scenes that had already been animated, it is needed since the anime does make significant changes to the OVA, such as removing a character along with the change in animation style. Meaning that for me they should have redone the OVA as an episode 1, as it would have properly introduced the characters and helped smooth out any confusing elements that are present due to the first episode occurring directly after the OVA. It would also help maintain interest in the show and by extension increase interest in the Noblesse series in general, which, for webtoons, would have been a good thing.